Our first panel, Innovating Within and With the Department of Defense and Department of Energy, will explore how innovation ecosystems intersect with federal agencies driving national security, energy leadership, and commercialization. We're proud to have this panel moderated and sponsored by Rodill, an honorary member of the National Academy of Inventors and managing partner at Command Strategies. Command Strategies works with academic organizations and leaders to evaluate R&D initiatives and match those initiatives to current and future requirements within the DoD. Please join me in welcoming Toby to lead this important conversation.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to introduce my panelists, starting with Mr. Anthony Pugliese from the Department of Energy.
It's been a while.
Might as well live up here. Dr. David Luzzi with Northeastern University. Mr. Michael Benedetto from Crumpton Ventures. Dr. Mark Dertzbaugh with Command Strategies. And online should be Mr. Eric Kelley with the United States Air Force. So again, good morning, everyone. I'm Tobias Rodill. I'm your moderator for this morning's insightful panel on innovation within and alongside the Department of Defense and Department of Energy. We're fortunate to have an impressive group of panelists with diverse backgrounds in Department of Defense, Department of Energy, academia, and venture capital. Here's how we're going to run this session. First, I'll ask each panelist for a brief introduction. Then we'll dive into some questions I've prepared for the panel. Finally, we'll open up for a Q&A session with you, our audience. Let's get started. Mr. Pugliese.
So Anthony Pugliese, I'm the Chief Commercialization Officer for the Department of Energy. I'm also the Director of the Office of Technology Commercialization, and I'm also the Director of a federal lab that does not actually exist. It just gives me some authority to do some interesting awards and whatnot. Prior to that, I was the Chief of Staff of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, overseeing the bulk power system and our power grid, or energy grid. Prior to that, was the Senior White House Advisor for Transportation and Infrastructure. So really worked very aggressively on trying to identify how we can permit a lot of these amazing projects that we're seeing in the United States better, understanding what the choke points were throughout the federal government especially, and understanding why so many of these projects, frankly, never get built. Originally from Pennsylvania, was a legislative director for the former Governor Tom Corbett in Pennsylvania. Worked in the Attorney General's office, the Senate, and have done a little bit of everything. So really excited to be here and to be with this amazing panel, and look forward to the conversation.
You've been busy.
I've been a little bit busy, yeah.
Dr. Luzzi.
Yes, hi, David Luzzi. I'm the Senior Vice Provost for Research and Vice President at Northeastern University. I've been in academia my entire career, and mainly active in research lab and then moving into faculty, into academic administration. During my research, which was in the area of material science and nanotechnology, and that was back when nanotechnology was going to solve every problem in the world. Now it's biotech and AI. But in any case, during that time, I was involved in 2 spin-out companies. But I would say most of my extracurricular work has been spent on working with the federal government, especially the Department of Defense. I was a Science and Technology Fellow for the Chief of Naval Operations Strategic Study Group, and I was the Science and Technology Chair for the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board. Also worked with the Defense Science Board on a number of things. So delighted to be here in this panel.
Thank you. Mr. Benedetto?
Thanks, Toby. Mike Benedetto. I'm the partner and chief investment officer at Crumpton Ventures. We are a venture and growth capital-based investor in national security with two primary objectives: to make great investments and to advance the national interest of the U.S. and its allies. Prior to joining Crumpton Ventures, I spent about 25 years in various investment banking and investment roles.
Dr. Dertzbaugh?
Hey, Mark Dertzbaugh. Spent 33 years in the Department of Defense working for the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command. My background was in microbiology and immunology. I did a lot of work on the bench of vaccines and then evolved into program management and then ultimately was the tech director there, overseeing all the programs that the Army funded in medical research. And retired in December and now working for Command Strategies.
Thank you. And Mr. Kelley?
Yes, good morning, and thanks for inviting me. First and foremost, I really love the previous discussion, and one of the terms that I like to use is failing forward. And I failed at a lot of things, but I've also succeeded. And so I've been around the government for about 45 years, but I've also spent about 4 years of the 45 in private industry, one with a major corporation associated with the Department of Energy, and then the second time around was with a research and development corp. But right now I spend a lot of time with the UARCs, and I'll share more about that later, but I'm very excited to participate this morning because I consider myself an innovator, and I'll share more of that a little bit later. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, sir. We'll actually have you start with the first question, Mr. Kelley. Throughout your career, you've consistently been in roles demanding rapid innovation in the face of global conflicts and great power competition. This prompts a crucial question. What role has academia played in fostering innovation for the Department of Defense, specifically in gaining an advantage over potential adversaries?
Yes, and so the one thing I will say, because at the advice of my lawyers, I'll say this. From an ethics perspective, I'm speaking from my 45 years experience. I'm not speaking for the Department of the Air Force. But I will say this, when it comes to university-affiliated research centers, as well as the Department of Energy, the national labs, I've leveraged both of them quite extensively. First, in the Balkans in the late 90s, looking for bad guys. And one of the funny stories that I'll share with you when it comes to using the national labs, back then, this is in the 90s, I was considered to be a knuckle dragger. And what I mean by that, I was one of those guys that was out in the field that needed to leverage technology to keep an eye on the bad guys. And so I remember engaging with one of the national labs, and they had invented select audio-video devices. And I shared with them, I said, what's the cost of this system? And they told me the cost. I said, well, what if I get 5? Will the cost go down? And so long story short, I bartered with the labs, and I engaged with them, and we improved the technology, and we leveraged the technology downrange to get the bad guys. I'll just leave it at that. But I am extremely appreciative of the labs and the UARCs. I mean, some of the problems that we're contending with today have to do with data analytics. And I'll tell you, finding that needle in the haystack, and then also, once we find the needle in the haystack, what are we going to do about it? The labs and the UARCs are helping me from a physical and virtual response related to some of those problems that are out there in the world today. In addition to that, they help me, for lack of a better term, change the mentality of some of the decision makers in the DoD. And what I mean by that is we have a standard where we call it TTPs, technical tactical procedures, and then a modus operandi. And so the labs help me document how to change those things, because as you know, change is hard. And so I hope I answered your question. Over.
You did. Thank you, sir. Mr. Pugliese, given the critical role of technology commercialization within federal agencies like the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, in considering past joint ventures such as Project Pele, the mobile nuclear reactor program, what do you see as the biggest challenges for transitioning technology in the market?
Well, I think first I would say that Project Pele isn't in the past. It's happening right now and making good progress. The project is a fantastic example of interagency collaboration, the power of public-private partnerships, and the advantages of pursuing novel technology as both national security and civilian uses. The mobile microreactor program also is moving forward after years of delay. Just last week, the Air Force issued a notice of intent to award a contract to Oklo to build at Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska. It's fair to say the project momentum was slower than originally we had hoped, but I think that it's getting back on the right track. Again, this is tech that has incredible national defense and civilian potential. For many projects, but especially nuclear, I think the biggest challenge to commercialization is permitting at the federal and state levels. Public acceptance and trust, especially from the safety and health impact perspectives, and the adequacy and timeliness of capital. The first two directly impact the last one. Capital tends to not be patient or willing to wait. I also think that from a permitting perspective, if I'm being honest, I think it's been weaponized, especially at the state level. I think that we need to kind of get politics out of this a little bit more. I'll go back to my time at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where and as a political person, this is sort of focused at me as well. We need to get the politicians out of that. When engineers stop deciding what kind of electricity or infrastructure we need, that was a problem. And so I think that we need to do a better job of kind of getting out of the way and taking the politics out of the permitting process and allowing the true experts who understand what it takes to have a resilient, reliable power grid and what it is required to build this stuff in an appropriate but also safe manner. That needs to be the focus. It shouldn't be politics. And that goes for both sides of the aisle, frankly. I'll also say that a lot of times when we talk about commercialization, there's not necessarily as much of a focus on adoption readiness. Does a ready workforce exist? Are there component materials available at scale? That is, does a reliable supply chain exist? Will the proposed new tech provide superior value to what's on the market today? Can it be sold profitable at a price point that the market is willing to pay? Cost often is prohibitive to market success. And that is the market ready to accept the technology? And by that I mean if vendors aren't willing to work with the developer and or manufacturer, or if there are no off-takers who are ready to roll right away, then you can't commercialize. And so I think identifying sort of what the market readiness is, understanding a lot of the issues that we see from a permitting perspective are really important.
Thank you for that. And I know a number of academic institutions actually participate in Project Pele, both from the DoD and the DOE side, which leads me into my next question for you, Dr. Luzzi. Northeastern University has significantly expanded its defense research portfolio over the past 9 years, leading to a substantial increase in expenditures. The growing engagement with the Department of Defense brings with it a unique set of requirements and challenges that often go beyond what's typical for a university. Considering the increased presence of control unclassified information, or CUI, requirements, restrictions concerning U.S. citizens versus green card holders, and the implementations of frameworks like CMMC and the Supplier Performance Risk System score, how do you anticipate academia will need to adapt and evolve its security standards and operational frameworks to meet these evolving DoD demands in the future? Lots of parts to that.
And never give an academic such a big and open question. Yeah. Coming from the perspective of universities and what the universities have delivered for the nation, and to build on what the two prior speakers spoke to, Absolutely, very important in terms of applied research and what universities can deliver. We have an applied research institute called the Costas Institute at Northeastern, and we have directly delivered, spin out a company that has taken technology out of Northeastern, now has technology on every Navy ship, every Navy surface ship on the U.S. fleet, and now is going to be deployed in NATO. So these kind of solutions directly into the field are something that are very exciting. I also want to point out, and back when I was in the leadership of the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board, we actually spent serious time defending the importance of basic research as a mix that's very important, and is kind of a different thing than applied research, which is very much directed to as a particular goal. So, if we go back to the contribution of universities and companies and national labs in the development of, for example, atomic clocks back decades ago when nobody really knew what that was going to mean in the future, that has become a foundational underpinning of GPS. And there's other examples in terms of research into semiconductors and then integrated circuits. Nobody was conceptualizing the internet or the ability to do everything that we have today. So it's extremely important to put a plug in, and the importance and the difference in terms of basic research and the importance of it for the future of the nation. That being said, universities need to get better at engaging and accepting the reality that we are emerging back into a period of great power competition, and it is going to be our reality for the rest, certainly for the rest of my career and life. Unfortunately, not that much remaining, but certainly in terms of everybody in this room, it is the reality, and therefore we need to embrace and recognize, if I can take politics out of it, that this is absolutely a bipartisan thing. So we see this from both parties in terms of the concerns over research security, the concerns over what the nation has lost in terms of great developments that are being harvested by adversaries. So in that realm, I think there's really two things that I think that universities have to get very serious about. One of them, of course, is about the whole cybersecurity thing, which is built around the CMMC and SPRS score. We have by the way, the government needs to recognize that it's extraordinarily hard for universities across the entire university, which includes the student body, and which of course includes a lot of international students, to have the entire university within that framework. Therefore, the universities have to recognize that they need to have, what is the normal communications and cyber environment of the university that still needs cybersecurity, robust cybersecurity, but then also must have secure enclave like, well, I shouldn't give a name because that would be promoting a product, but one of the products out there that provides secure enclaves for doing communications in a confidential, unclassified information environment. And then, of course, those universities that make the choice, like Northeastern has, to build out a security office and operate a high-quality, robust security office that understands how to engage with the federal government for contracts that have DD-254s, et cetera. There's one second thing that I want to bring in that a lot of universities are not thinking about right now, but we have certainly taken it on very seriously. As you make investments, especially in the cyber infrastructure for the university, be very cognizant, sorry, that's a useless modifier, be cognizant of the federal government's moves in terms of caution about particular suppliers around the world, and factor that into your investment decisions, because as the federal government looks to do business with us in terms of research in the future, they will be looking at what is the cyber infrastructure that your AI research is going to be running on, and all of your innovation is going to be running on. And if that cyber, which means compute infrastructure, is the products of companies that are of concern of the federal government is likely going to have a problem with that. So as you think about your investments, and this is something that for those chief research officers in the room, this is something that we can really take on seriously. Add another question into your probe. Don't always go for the lowest price, because very often the lowest price can be an enticement. Look seriously about security of your entire hardware and software infrastructure. Did I get the question done?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you
Okay.
very much. Mr. Benedetto, as we look and have heard from the other panelists so far about tech commercialization and transitioning technology to the marketplace and the importance of it, over the past several administrations, the infusion of venture capital and private equity funding into defense-related small businesses through initiatives like InQtel and the Defense Innovation Unit has been strongly endorsed. From my perspective, this has become a new gold rush, if you will, attracting numerous non-traditional funds to invest in defense technologies, which often appears to lead to the overvaluation of the company and their innovations. In light of this movement, how has the increased influx of non-traditional funding impacted traditional defense-focused investment funds, and what specific challenges are associated with this surge in the market?
Well, you get the opportunity to pay later stage growth prices for taking venture capital risk. I'm joking, but there has clearly been a massive influx of capital into the space that we've been focused on. 5 to 10 years ago, the venture, and that's the area we're primarily focused on, ecosystem largely looked like people like us, so sector-focused national security funds, and then some government-related entities. About 10 years ago, the Department of Defense stood up DIU. The intelligence community goes back about 20 years with a firm called InQtel, which is actually a really terrific model for integrating private market technologies and capabilities into government. The InQtel started as the venture capital arm of the CIA. It's now expanded to cover the entire intelligence community and works with the military branches quite robustly. At the lack of some oversimplification, the reason that there's been this influx of private capital into, call it defense tech and dual-use technologies, is the overwhelming success of some of the companies like Palantir, Anduril, and SpaceX have had in accessing government dollars and the government as a customer. Now, what people often forget is all three of those companies had to sue the government at one point in order to become a substantial government customer. But it worked, and to the government's credit, I think there is a really significant interest, particularly with the rapid development cycles that the wars in Eastern Europe in particular have shown, to go to the private market when they're looking for a technology and capability first, see if there's something that can satisfy the requirement, rather than doing the older, sort of less wieldy version of going to a Raytheon, a Boeing, and doing some sort of exquisite cost-plus contract that's going to take a lot of time. And I would obviously be remiss if I didn't say, clearly governments are massively increasing their spending in this area, and that's attracting a lot of opportunities as well. What has happened is the sector has evolved from the defense-focused funds and the DIUs and the InQtels to include, call it, more generalist funds. They brought the most tonnage in terms of capital into our marketplace. But interestingly enough, there's the Boeings, Lockheeds, and Raytheons have done a really good job of standing up their own venture capital arms and investing in early and middle stage companies. It's got multiple reasons for them. I think they'll be good investments, but it's also in a way seeding the acquisition pipeline for their future product portfolios. And then we like this dynamic, but it's a relatively, there's been a massive amount of private wealth. So sort of think large family offices who really want to get into this fight to the great power competition and want to help entrepreneurs and ultimately the warfighters downrange have the best possible technology and capabilities they can. Anyways, so the bad news is we're all paying higher prices for the deals we're doing. The good news is there's more capital in the ecosystem. And what that does for companies is capital provides them the resources to change course correct if they need to. And most of early stage companies do have to course correct at some point. So the silver lining from an investor's perspective of having to pay more is that the companies have a longer sort of time-based optionality to figure out how to work in this ecosystem.
Perfect, thank you.
Thanks.
Dr. Dertzbaugh, as a former principal assistant for research and technology at the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command, could you describe the process for determining which types of medical technologies are needed to benefit the warfighter and how the critical technologies are prioritized within the command?
Yeah, so thanks, Toby. Most of my experience has been on the Army side, but there's been, more recent times, familiarity with what's going on in the Defense Health Agency side of the house, too, which also does medical investments there. A lot of people don't even realize the DoD invests in medical research, but it does. Certainly not to the extent of like NIH, but to the point that's been raised earlier, a lot of it's very applied research. It's not so much on the basic research realm of things. But it all starts with, the warfighters getting together and wargaming, and the time horizon the Army's focused on is right now for science and technology investments is actually 2040. And so you're looking out that far to say, what does that look like in the future? Who are our competitors going to be? Very concerned about maintaining technical superiority. And of course, as you already alluded to, some of our peer competitors are innovating a lot faster than we are. And so how do we maintain that technical superiority and innovate more rapidly than we have done historically? So they're looking at different mechanisms for doing that. Some of the InQTELs and the other DIU are some vehicles to do that. Another big push has been on other transaction authorities, which is a non-federal acquisition regulation-based vehicle that allows more collaborative work together with the performer as well as the government to try to refine the technology, more liberal in its terms of intellectual property rights, and also, hopefully some cost sharing there if there's some dual use nature of that. So, they're trying to look at different ways to help incentivize and speed up the innovation cycle. But it all starts with what, their mission is and what the threats are they think they see in the future, and then back down into, what does that translate to, into what capabilities do we need? And they may be just notional. So they may not have a good idea, actually, how would we use this capability if we had it? But working together with other smart people, who are subject matter experts, both in the government and out in academia and industry, they'll do some tabletop exercises to try to say, well, if we did this, how would that work? How would we use it? And then you get some notional key performance parameters that then hopefully you can start soliciting some ideas from performers and may come up with a prototype then that you can take out there into the field to an actual user and let them kick the tires on it. And we were guilty of this when I first started, 30 plus years ago. We would invest millions of dollars, in the technology development, and we thought we knew what the user needed out there. And we'd get done after 10 years and say, hey, we got this great thing, you guys, you should love it. And it's like, we don't need this. This isn't going to suit us. I don't know how the hell to use it. Or, does somebody else on the acquisition program side who would do the development and fielding and say, well, somebody out there already has something like that similar commercially, so, we're not interested in taking this technology. So the DoD is trying to get out of that problem set and work more iteratively and collaboratively with both the user as well as the technical community to be able to refine that technology in real time and then continue iterating and then get it out into the field as quickly as possible. So, and then on the Defense Health Agency side, it's working a little bit differently because it is a joint organization for all the joint services. They have to reconcile the priorities that may differ across the services, at least as far as the medical side goes. So there's actually been a working group that's been trying to come to agreement on the high-level capabilities that all the services need for medical, and then that is going to help drive and inform what the prioritization investments are going to be for the Defense Health Agency.
Great, thank you. The next question, I'll actually start with Mr. Kelley, but this is open for the panel because it has applications across DoD, DOE, the VC space, and everything else. Mr. Kelley, how important is it for new technologies to have dual use applications?
One, vitally important. One of the things I'd like to say is, as I'm listening, I keep hearing the term building the airplane in flight. One of the things that, if you didn't pick up on, I lead the Capabilities Development Management Office, and our job is to fill in those gaps and seams that that have either been identified by us or other people within the DoD to help with current problems. And I literally mean current problems. So I'll just say this, when it comes to applied research and advanced technology development, that's why my office exists. And so, without getting into some of the current problems that we're dealing with, but I would like to say this, that's the whole reason why I'm here today and I'm actually doing the job that I do, is because I want to give back. I want to teach those guys and gals behind me how to take advantage of applied research and advanced technology, leveraging the labs, leveraging the university system, and really take it to our adversary with current solutions, maybe not fully tested, but certainly leveraging the labs and the universities to help me validate it enough to get it into the field ASAP. Under my current portfolio, I have cyber, I have data analytics, AI ML, as well as some other things that I won't mention, but currently needed by the warfighter. And so I appreciate the opportunity to answer the question, but I hope I answered your question. Over.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else on the panel, please?
Yeah, I'll say two things real quick. One, been hearing about In-Q-Tel more and more, and they do a lot of great work, but I would be remiss if I didn't sort of let you all know that we have our own foundation within DOE. It's called the FESI, Foundation for Energy Security and Innovation. And our CEO, our first CEO of the foundation has just been hired about 2 weeks ago. He starts in about 2 weeks. And so this is going to be our foundation to try to help fill those gaps between the public and private sectors. And so please keep an eye out for that. We're very excited. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for FESI to kind of help support the mission within DOE and the national labs. I want to say I'm also very excited about this, frankly, when we talk about the dual use opportunities. My office is beginning to create partnerships with the Navy, the CIA, and the Secret Service to identify dual use opportunities. And a really good example of this is with the Navy, for example, it's underwater drone technology. There's so many opportunities for the civilian use of underwater drones, whether that be for pipelines, minerals, identifying, just general research. And so, the Navy has developed some incredible technology for their own use, but there's tremendous other opportunities there. And so, because of the non-existent lab that I oversee, I have what's called PIA Authority, Partnership Intermediary Authority, and it allows me to do some really amazing partnerships and be a little bit more agile, do other transactional authorities. And so the Navy, Secret Service, and CIA are utilizing my PIA Authority to identify dual-use opportunities, and we're really excited about it.
If I could just add a little bit to that. NATO Diana, which is the Defense Innovation something for North America, I'm not sure what the A is. In any case, just released its S&T priorities, and just in terms of connecting defense and energy here on our panel, the number one thing on their priority list is energy and power. There's lots of, so what I'm going to say really is going to sound like DOD, but really embraces both. If we look at, I want to speak from the perspective of universities. We have something really important to deliver for the nation that we have kind of walked away from as a nation for a while now in terms of this dual use and expanding what the meaning of dual use is. The top two priorities of the Department of Defense is boat construction, ship construction, submarines, Right now, we're producing about 1 to 1.2 a year, and we're supposed to be at 3. The challenge here is not that we don't understand how to build submarines. We build the finest submarines in the world. The problem is we don't have the capacity as a nation to do it. So as we think about expanding public-private partnership and coming together, we need to be thinking about not just one-off technologies or sexy little, tchotchkes that can be developed in terms of new communication technology or new sensor or new cyber tool or a new AI tool, but also what can we do to build up the infrastructure of the nation to be able to produce at the level we need to produce. And then, of course, building this capacity will get the U.S. back in the game in terms of commercial shipbuilding, more capability to build underwater drones and capacity to do that. It is a necessity, but it has an advanced technology piece because we cannot do it the way the rest of the world does it by throwing lots of people at it, and that's actually unfair to the rest of the world because the rest of the world has more advanced shipyards than we do right now. So advanced technology must be one of it, but workforce training must be another one. We must develop new models for public-private partnership, and we must address supply chain. So we have been very active in that. We have an institute in the Defense Industrial Base at Northeastern, but it is just at the beginning stages, and there's tremendous opportunity for universities across the nation to really get involved in this, and I believe that the Department of Defense, Department of Energy are going to be leaning in to getting this done. So that's an aspect of dual use that I think we don't normally think about, but is extremely important. The second priority is C5 ISRT, which is a lot of sexy devices and stuff like that, so it gets everybody back into their comfort zone of dual-use technologies. Obviously, tremendous opportunities in terms of everything from devices for communications to new tools with AI for decision support and decision makers, et cetera. I won't belabor that. But really, across those two spectrums, the infrastructure to the sexy stuff, that was unfair to infrastructure. Infrastructure can be sexy too. But there's a lot of opportunities for universities to engage with the national labs and the departments.
Yeah, I just add from the investment community's perspective, it's critical and in no small part because the timeline from getting a new technology or a new capability into the acquisition pipeline within the government can take an inordinate amount of time, and so you just need another path to generate revenue profits at some point along the line. And if you don't need it, fantastic, but it's a really important piece of our diligence. We want to know that there are multiple paths for a company's technology to win.
Yeah, I guess the only other point I'd make about the dual use side, and this is from more my perspective on the medical side, is obviously DoD is not a big buyer of medical stuff in most of the time, so they depend heavily on the commercial sector for generating the pull for procurement to drive companies to want to sell these products. The only caveat to that I would say is unlike a hospital which might have plenty of room for a piece of equipment, you're more worried if you're trying to take that out into the field, size, weight, power, cube, all those things, to make it logistically difficult or rugged enough to survive out in an environment that would be potentially used in a field. So that's where it's ideally you can help kind of influence those design requirements early on before it's actually made and commercialized, so that it meets DoD requirements as well.
Thank you for that. And as a kind of follow-on to that question, so Mr. Pugliese, how can academia or venture capitalists play a larger role in addressing the transition or advancement of technology? Looking ahead, do you envision a future where a technology transition plan would be a requirement in a submission to an RFP?
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. I think in a way we're already doing that at DOE. We have a lot of initiatives that support scientists and entrepreneurs who are on the road to commercializing their technologies. These programs include cash prizes, low interest loans, and loan guarantees, and assistance from our outstanding national lab researchers and subject matter experts and use of certain national lab facilities. I do want to also acknowledge real quick, I think we recognize at DOE that sometimes partnering with a national lab can be difficult. This was sort of alluded to a few minutes ago. And so, whether it's developing a CRADA or whatever else it might be, I think that we are looking at how to make that more efficient, because 18 months to 3 years to develop a CRADA, it doesn't create a lot of confidence or incentivize people to come work with our national labs or the department. But moving forward, I think we are looking to make that more efficient. I legitimately give credit to the last administration. I think that they tried to address this. It was what's called ARTES, but it frankly just added another layer of bureaucracy and another layer of approval that was not needed. Getting back to the question, I think we also have a lot of programs that support incubators and accelerators and the startups that join them, and we've helped build other networks that provide mentoring and connect folks with substantial business development and mature and other experiences who are identify folks that are more seasoned, who can help support these folks who are a little bit more green to the process. Sometimes the application criteria includes submission of a business plan that shows how the company will move their tech from idea or early design or first prototype to a product that competes and wins in the commercial marketplace. And we score the application in part on how viable we think that plan is. We think that the plan won't achieve its commercialization. We may tell the applicant to reevaluate and revise it and reapply during the next round of applications. I think we don't want to just fund technology because it's cool technology. We want it to actually address the issues that we face every day, and this frankly goes back to what we're seeing in the national labs. Is we are investing as taxpayers millions, if not billions, of dollars on developing technology to address a certain issue, but if that technology is not being deployed to address that issue, it's just sitting on a shelf for the next 10 years. Then we failed.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Benedetto, as a continuation of that, drawing from your historical investment practices, what key criteria do you typically look for when evaluating a company for investment? And what are your expectations for the company's performance and development post-investment?
The second part of the question really depends at what stage we're investing, and we sometimes invest in seed deals where we're really incubating a technology, and we'll do later stage growth too, and we underwrite the risk differently, but we're happy to participate in both. The first thing we want to make sure is we understand the technology and the capability, and we see a product market fit. And there's this, and we spend a lot of our time thinking about the warfighter downrange, and one of the weird things that happens is when the warfighter downrange says, look, I need this capability, it sort of filters up through the chain of command, and then it gets to the procurement office, and then the defense contractors start lobbying it, and it's almost like a game of telephone. The goalposts move a little bit from what happened downrange to what the requirement is. And so we try and make sure, and my team is composed of folks, I am not one of them, but composed of folks who've been in virtually every environment within the military and the intelligence community that you can envision, and we want to make sure that we understand both. The second piece that we are very thoughtful about, and again, we underwrite the risk differently depending on what sort of TRL or what technical maturity the capability has. But our view is that for most of the things that we're being investing, DoD or the IC's tolerance for things not working sort of 100% out of the box is going to be very, very low. So we have a lot of folks who are focused on making sure that technical capability, we can do that in low rate production, and then if hopefully we get the opportunity to scale production, it'll still work at that level. And then the hardest thing for us as an investor is just the team. The founders, the C-suite, even the directors, the investors, it's really an important piece of success. The biggest scarcity that we find is it's not technical talent, it's not even sort of operational talent, it's the ability to commercialize and take a product to market and sell it effectively. And that's where we find the most scarcity. So we spend a lot of time thinking about the player personnel with that role in particular in mind.
Great, thank you. Dr. Dertzbaugh, with certain elements of the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command transitioning to the Defense Health Agency, which is newer, it's happened in the last year or so, although it was mandated by Congress a couple of years ago. How do you anticipate the management of these projects will differ from DHA oversight compared to the Medical Research and Development Command's previous approach?
Yeah, and just a little more background. So the original congressional language was inserted into the Defense Appropriation Bill back in 2017, and it took several years of wrangling between the services and Defense Health Agency and a little more prodding by Congress before we finally got things moving there. And so by the time I left this past year, we pretty much were well on our way to transitioning. It's going to be a bit of a hybrid model. There are some elements of the organization that will still be Army aligned, but most of it will be under the Defense Health Agency. And having said that, then while the program managers are all mostly be the same people that were managing the programs on the Army side, there are already some friction points happening, as you would envision, between a joint organization with their priorities versus maybe a service that has their priorities, and they may not necessarily be exactly the same. So that's, again, they're trying to work through how to reconcile the differences in priorities and how will Defense Health Agency invest to support all the services needs, as a combatant command agency.
Great, thank you. And this question is open to the whole panel, but again, I'll start with you, Mr. Kelley. The trend, at least as I have seen it over the last couple of years, suggests a stronger emphasis on applied research and advanced technology development, often driven by the urgency of great power competition, which we've all mentioned several times, and the need to rapidly fill the capability. Do you think this trend will continue in the future? And where would basic research kind of stand in the future as well?
I have the question written down. So bottom line is I think the trend will continue. One of the things that we've done is adopted a contract program called Commercialization offering, which allows for small companies, large companies to write a proposal, or if we have a mission partner that has a problem and they bring a commercial company to us that has something that can solve the problem, we will allow for them to write a white paper that articulates how they can solve the problem. We vet that, and then we ultimately execute with that contract in place. And we can do it very rapidly. But Bob, I just want to answer the question. Yes, we're going to continue with applied research and advanced technology solutions. We can't do without it in this competitive space or great power competition. I'm sorry. Over.
Right, thank you. Anybody else on the panel?
Well, I think David already talked about it before. Certainly most of what DoD will be investing in is applied research because they've got a mission and they have certain capabilities they need. But to some extent, they will continue to be investing in basic research because there's just fundamental things regarding materials, sciences, physics, artificial intelligence that are foundational that potentially nobody else will be doing or investing in. So there will be some element of that, I think, in the future, but certainly a stay heavy focused on applied research.
Dr. Luzzi?
Yeah, Toby, there's really two very important aspects of your question. One is about the applied research and the research going forward, but the other was about the underlying premise was the great power competition and the time sensitivity of that as a nation. So we're in a serious race here, and there are bad things in the world that can happen if we don't keep up with the competition in terms of this race. I've been in academic research administration and leadership for almost 2 decades now. And, in that time, I've seen the growth in terms of the sand in the gears that we have as a nation in terms of our ability to move quickly and get things done quickly. And a lot of this is, all based on regulations that have come out. Everybody likes to blame Congress for regulation, but actually Congress just sets the laws, and there's a whole lot of regulation that comes out of the executive branch agencies. And this regulation is something, if we look at two negative impacts, of course, one is it slows everything down. The second thing is it takes our researchers' percentage of time. Now I believe the latest survey is 40% of our researchers' time across academia is spent dealing with the overhead of a research program versus actually being in the lab executing research program. And obviously, you never solve everything, but you want to move the needle, and you want to start moving the needle back in the right direction. So I would foot stomp the importance of the departments to take a real serious look from the top level and really set the guidance to take a hard look at what regulations are very important, because there are very important regulations, and that what regulations can be streamlined and reduced in order to kind of free the nation in terms of moving forward effectively. And I just want to say that we have other transaction agreements. 100% of the other transaction agreements that we have contain federal acquisition regulation clauses that the contracts folks in the department felt insecure about putting that other transaction authority forward without incorporating a bunch of federal acquisition regulations into these contracts. So, that's an example of how the best intentions can still be somewhat constrained in terms of the environment that we have. So that's kind of a macroeconomic plea here, but since we have high-level leaders here on the panel, I figured I'd throw it out there and see what happens.
I think I just want to highlight what you just said a little bit, which is the regulatory burden is real, and it's not only very costly financially, but from a time and personal resource perspective. And so I think what we are trying to do is, as an administration, are trying to identify what was. So many times what happens in government is a regulation was put in place with the best of intentions, and then 3-4 decades later, it's obsolete, but it's still on the books. And so, like a lot of programs, for example, we tend to keep growing and growing and growing, and we don't do a self evaluation of identifying what still makes sense today. And so I just want to acknowledge what you're saying, and because I think that you're absolutely right. We as a government and this administration, I think, is focused on trying to identify what regulations are still relevant today and what are irrelevant but costing time and money and slowing down the progress of innovation or deployment of technology or whatever else it might be. Frankly, I saw that in more than anywhere at the Department of Transportation. There were so many regulations within DOT from a highways perspective or hazmat or FAA or whatever else it might be that were put in place with, again, the best of intentions, but were just totally obsolete in today's time. But we're still in the books and slowing things down and costing the private sector a tremendous amount of time and money.
Yeah, well, just on that point, even on the pharma biotech side, as you may be tracking, a lot more of the pharma companies are out, going overseas to do their early stage discovery work in phase 1 clinical trials because it's just faster and cheaper to do it over there than here.
No, thank you for that. And the couple of minutes we have left before Q&A, again, a question open to the panel, because I know most of the audience here is from academia, and they're very much interested in working more with the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. So the question I have is, what are current challenges for you guys working with academia right now?
I'll happily start. Again, it's something I touched on a few minutes ago, which is these CRADAs, these agreements for academia or the private sector in general, to partner with our national labs. It is just so difficult. In a lot of cases, depending on which lab, you'll work with ARTES, which is for some reason in international affairs, our international affairs department, and then you might have our intelligence unit, you might have the Office of Science, you might have the NNSA. They all decide that they need to put their stamp of approval on that agreement, and it really is a disincentive to come and work with the department. And I would say also from an SBIR, STTR, the department there's a lot of room for improvement. And so in a lot of cases, my federal colleague from DoD will appreciate this. A lot of times individuals will come and do a phase 1 or phase 2 with DOE, and then they'll go to DoD for phase 3s. And we need to do a better job of tracking and identifying the performance of our programs, our SBIRs, SCTRs. But in general, I think that we need to be more user-friendly. One of the things that I would love to do, frankly, this is kudos to my colleagues at Department of Transportation. They have something called the Build America Bureau, which is an entity within the Department of Transportation that you come in, you say, this is the kind of work I'm interested in, the kind of the technology I'm working on, and it helps you identify what programs, loans, grants, whatever else might be, are within the entire DOT complex. And so where a lot of cases you might have 3 or 4 different applications you might have to do, it's one application. They help you write it, and then they actually will go and help you find financing. That's a one-stop shop. That's user-friendly, and DOE should follow that lead and identify how we can be more user-friendly, support partnerships within the private sector. Because, listen, we're doing amazing stuff within the DOE and especially within our national labs. But we need to do a better job of partnering with the private sector, because that's where there's just a tremendous amount of innovation occurring. But if we make it so difficult to work with us, then that partnership's not going to occur.
Great, thank you. Mr. Kelley, do you have anything to add?
Anthony, when you come back to DC, I'd like to link up with you. So the other comment, I've been very fortunate. My next job's on the lawnmower, and so I hope that we don't get interfered with in my organization, because whether it's above the fray or below the fray, I've been able to work with academia, private industry, specifically venture capital groups. So I just say, keep us in prayer and allow for the gloves to stay off so that we can help the nation. And that's all I've got to say. Over.
Thank you, sir. And Dr. Luzzi, how do you prepare your faculty, your PIs, to work with the DoD? What do you train them to do when they speak with a program manager?
I think I can speak for every administrator in the room when I say constant engagement with repetition is important when it comes to faculty. But I've always seen our faculty respond to opportunity, but also to potential for intellectual excitement is really what motivates them. And I do want to just say an important plug for SBIR. We have multiple examples at Northeastern, and I'm sure the universities in the room do also, in which spin-out companies with SBIRs have benefited from that, and that has delivered back to the nation in terms of transition technologies for national security or for commercial applications, dual use. But so Toby, I think it's very important. Obviously the federal government is the biggest customer for university research in the country, and we have to listen to the voice of the customer. We have to listen to the priorities of the customer, and we have to help our faculty to, reconfigure collaborations, because so much of things are interdisciplinary today, and the and the interdisciplinary collaborations for things that were, that were funded in past years and in the a decade ago, and with new faculty coming on board all the time in terms of young faculty or senior faculty joining the university, constantly having research exchanges which help the faculty develop new collaborations, but also, as part of those research exchanges, actively bringing forward to them an analysis of what are the opportunities with the federal government.
That's perfect. I really appreciate that. With the remaining time right now, I think we'll open it up to Q&A.
Sure. Morning, gentlemen. One question on the topic of semiconductor manufacturing here in the United States. I'm curious to get your thoughts on the current and future state of semiconductor manufacturing and the impact of the CHIPS Act to date.
Mike, you start.
I'll take a stab. The chip. So let me preface it by saying we've not invested in a semiconductor manufacturing. I know there's a lot of really interesting things happening with TSMC in Arizona and other places, and Samsung in Texas. The CHIPS Act, I will just say I'm generally supportive of the amount of money that it has allocated to increasing our ability to have advanced manufacturing of semiconductors.
Yeah, if I could say, one of the challenges is there's a real technology chasm, if you will, between university research and impacting industry, because a lot of what is done in universities is done at a size scale, not in terms of dimensions of devices, that's not the issue, in terms of the integrated size that you're working on. And it's a big step to go from something which is done, in a square millimeter or a square centimeter to something that is done on wafer scale. So, one of the approaches that we have taken at Northeastern, and it hasn't been cheap, and so that's a factor that you have to look into also, is to actually develop a research laboratory infrastructure that can do things at a wafer scale that is compatible with industry. And then, of course, that makes it a bit more expensive in terms of the cost of every experiment that you do. But if you're operating at that scale, then the transfer to industry, and what we've discovered is it's brought in more industry partner engagement as industry has seen this at university. They have been pulled closer to us in terms of engagement. Of course, we have been focusing on mainly devices around ferroelectrics and piezoelectrics, and in the direction of zero power sensors and things like that. But this could be applied across the whole industry. What TSMC is doing in Arizona, of course, is extraordinary execution of today's technology, which is a big part of building up the national capacity to make semiconductors. That's less about university engagement and research engagement. That's a very big part of the challenge. And of course, everybody focuses on that, but also the U.S. is hugely behind in packaging and what needs to be developed in the country in terms of packaging. And I think that's an area where national labs and universities can all kind of lean in and help a lot.
Okay. Second question. Sometimes we as academic innovators face difficulty in gaining support internally from our own institution. How would you advise an academic inventor that believes they have technology that would be of interest in DoD or DoD applications, but is having difficulty in advancing their technology today?
Well, I'll take a stab at this, the Army Medical Research Development Command has 7 of its own organic labs, and they each have their own unique cultures, but they're similar to academic labs as well. But those labs would, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again?
An academic innovator knows they have something of
Right,
value,
okay.
wants to advance
Yeah.
it, and is having difficulty.
So this was a problem we had in our labs too, and I'm sure it's the same problem in academia. How I speak about things, from a technology level and the jargon I use does not translate well when you go up the food chain, probably in the senior level in a company, or the same as a 4-star general in the DoD. So how is this unique technology gonna enable me to fight better or sell more product or get more revenue? And that translation, a lot of technology-based subject matter experts are not very good at doing that translation. So having a translator, an intermediary, who can help translate what the significance of this technology is into how it's actually going to be useful out there, to the potential user community, that's very important.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that. So with the universities that we work with, specifically the PIs, we help identify the program manager within the DoD or the end user customer that will actually advocate on behalf of the faculty as well and say, yes, I have a requirement and need a capability gap, and I feel that this technology, if developed further, could fill that capability gap. And then we take it to the leadership within the university to present the end state and where it currently is.
And I like to foot stomp that, because I think in the premise here is that, especially if these technologies are, say, very advanced and national security based, the tech transfer folks do not see the big market opportunity, and therefore it's a harder decision to make. So absolutely, this engagement with the government is a very important component of that, to help move that along.
Well, as a senior government official, I think, to the point, dumbing it down for folks like me is really helpful. I think, being able to identify sort of what that need is and why it's important helps us make that decision, because at the end of the day, I have a boss too. And so I have to go to my boss and explain why I just funded something for thousands, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, if not more. And so I think the more you can explain the value of that technology, the easier it is for us decision makers to help support that innovation and technology.
Next question. On the topic of DoD training requirements. Coming from Central Florida, where an ecosystem has been established with simulated training, we are hearing that funding may be rerouted to support more live training opportunities than simulated training opportunities. Curious to get your thoughts on the topic.
So I don't know if this is in reference to like the STTC and the PEO folks down there, sim community, but and at least speaking for the Army side, I mean, they were investing pretty heavily in that. Having said that, there is certainly a desire to translate, what maybe you do with simulation into actual, can actually do this in the field. And there are limits still to what you can do with a simulation, although we've gotten a lot better at that and also in the modeling aspects, right?
Yeah, I will add to that. So we work with another 20 companies that are outside of academia. One is a training simulation company, and recently in the last 60 to 90 days, we've actually seen an increase in RFPs coming out specific to XR, VR, whatever the training mechanism might be. So I don't see it right now shifting back to live fire training, because that's also very expensive, which is why we went to simulations. I think it will be fairly consistent moving forward.
All right, last question. Comment here is, hypersonics are believed to be of interest to both the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. What is your opinion on the current status of hypersonics and how they might be used going forward?
Well, okay, so I'm a nerd, all right? So that's not a pejorative in my world. Okay, so I once heard a very wise, high-level tech leader in the Department of Defense say, it is the responsibility of the tech field, the community, the nerds like me, to make sure that we get the technology developed to a level where the policymakers and the decision makers have opportunities or options and degrees of freedom that they need to do what's necessary for the nation. That question seems to be going more towards that policy side of things. I would just say hypersonics, yes, we need to be all in developing the technology around hypersonics and counter hypersonics because we need to be able to provide that to the senior leaders of this nation when the nation's going to need it.
I think
Yeah,
the counter is
just
super
on that.
important. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to add to that on that point. I know I was at a conference in Indo-PACOM a couple years back, and the Indo-PACOM commander there made the point in the tech community that was at the meeting that, you know, if China, for example, launched hypersonics in Hawaii, he had about 10 seconds to make a decision about how to respond. And so, you know, again, you know, that's not much time to make a decision and make a right one, right? The decision support and the tools needed to be able to sense and then come to a decision, you know, that time is getting compressed significantly, right?
Toby, if I can riff on
please,
that real
yeah.
quick, because that time scale, although 10 seconds sounds really short, but, you know, if we think about, you know, if I'm sitting on a ship and there's a hypersonic missile coming in, I don't want a human in the loop deciding how to aim and fire. I want that Aegis system to be AI-based and making good decisions and going and firing, okay? At the other end of the spectrum, we know that there are plenty of examples now where humans in the loop with AI comes to superior outcomes than AI alone, right, obviously. Okay, so I would argue that in terms of university research, national lab research, et cetera, we really need to be leaning in also on the new AI world, and very importantly, and we have a contract with the Army Research Lab in this area with the Data Analysis Center, getting to that whole, you know, euphemistic term, trustworthy AI. But what does that really mean? It means understanding how to evaluate AI, because there's multiple AI approaches, and there are going to be better AI approaches than others. We need to be able to provide the tools to understand how to evaluate AI algorithms, verify AI algorithms, whether it be in the lab or when a commander is looking to see whether a system is still green light and doing what it's supposed to do versus being compromised by the adversary. How do you know that in the AI world of tomorrow or today? These are things that the academic community needs to be seriously paying attention to and developing. Not just new AI algorithms, but how do we get trustworthy AI?
You know, Mike, I'd be curious to see the deal flow that you have seen with hypersonics, because I know every company threw AI in their name somewhere.
Right. I will tell you there's reason to be encouraged about some of the hypersonic development in the private sector, and it's a good example of the departure from the old sort of cost-plus model with the, you know, the historic defensive primes into some really young, innovative folks taking on that technical challenge and succeeding in ways that I think DoD is paying a lot of attention to right now. You know, integrated air defense with utilization of AI and all the pieces, the counter sort of missile, counter drone technologies. It's also an area, we're running out of time here, I could go on but that is an area that has been an intense focus for us. I think if the Golden Dome comes out even in some form or fashion like it's envisioned right now, I think that will be a largely space-based system. I think the cost of launch has gotten down to the point where that's practicable. And you'll see a lot of the things both that we've been talking about in this last few minutes get appropriate funding and get appropriate focus. And I hope there will be some real benefits from all of that.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think I'm in a really fortunate situation where I get to go to our national labs and see the amazing technology that's being worked on. And I will tell you, I'm really encouraged, as several of my fellow panelists have mentioned, of where we're at right now. You know, I think initially we talk a lot of us talk a lot about our weapons labs and the nuclear weapons labs and whatnot. It's the three. It's Sandia, Los Alamos, and Lawrence Livermore National Lab. But the work that our other national labs are doing on the counter to respond to hypersonics is frankly where I'm really focused on, because I think that's incredibly important. So I'm excited where we're at on the offense part, but where we need to focus on the defense part is incredibly important. And I think the three weapons labs are working on the offense more than anybody, but the other 14, their work on the defense is just as important, if not more important.
Perfect. And with that, I'd like to thank all the panelists for your time. I thought this was a great discussion. The audience and the National Academy of Inventors for having us. Thank you.